For that, well, let's move on to our first conversation then. Budget 2013 is behind us, but the finance minister says there is still a long way to go and more reforms are expected in Parliament. Let's welcome in Dr. D.K. Joshi, Principal Economist at Crisil. Dr. Joshi, so we've got the numbers, we've got the announcements. Let's get your sense on this. First of all, the biggest task ahead before the finance minister this year perhaps was to rein in the fiscal deficit. How believable are the targets that have been set out?
Well, I think if you look at the progress since last year, things have only improved on the fiscal front. But I think this year's targets are particularly tough to meet for two reasons, I think. One, obviously, I think he's factoring in a very sharp increase in revenues, and particularly the non-tax revenues, where the completion or the revenue generation record has not been very good in the past. The second is that the elections are also nearing, so I think there is possibility of some slippage on the expenditure front, though he has cushioned it enough. But unlike last year, where I think you were able to meet the deficit targets by sharply cutting down expenditures, this year it would be a rather arduous task to cut expenditures so sharply. So I think we believe that the fiscal deficit could marginally slip to about 5% of GDP instead of 4.8% what has been budgeted.
Dr. Joshi, this whole talk about mobilizing better revenues, we know that the government has fallen short on its revenue generation target in the past several years, almost 4 to 5 years in a row now. Was there anything in the budget or the budget fine print that gives you confidence that we will actually see better government revenues in the new year?
Well, I think you can see better. I think there are two parts of the revenues. One is the tax revenue, which depends on the performance of the economy, how quickly the economy rebounds. It also depends on the performance, particularly of the industry, because I think a lot of taxes, particularly in excise, etc., come from industry. So I think that is one part. The second part is the non-tax revenues, where I think issues like telecom, spectrum sales, or divestments, I think there, if government wants to achieve its rather ambitious targets, I think it has to start right from the beginning. I think typically what we see is that there is hurried activity towards the end of the fiscal year, and it's not easy to push the divestment. So though they have succeeded last year to quite some extent, but I think if they want to achieve these targets, I think you have to start right from the beginning of the fiscal year. Otherwise, I think, as I said, we do expect a slippage.
Now, the other agenda before the FM this budget perhaps was to somehow kickstart the investment cycle and get confidence back. So we heard those small announcements here and there about tax stops for companies which will be investing about 100 crores. There's some talk of lowering that as well. Do you think they've moved in the right direction towards meeting that objective, towards getting the capex cycle back on track?
Well, I think the budget cannot do too much about it. I mean, I think whatever the budget could do in terms of some announcement, it has been done. But I think the private corporate investment scenario is quite bleak, I mean, at this juncture. If you look at the private corporate investment since 2011-12, there was a negative growth. There was a decline in corporate investment by something like 13%, and then in 2012-13, Crisil estimated that the corporate investment could fall by something like 35%. And 2013-14 also the scenario is not very bright, because the project pipeline itself has begun to shrink. So I think in this scenario, kick-starting private corporate investment cannot be done through budgetary measures alone. I think you have to delve deeper into the issues. And here I think some of the issues that need to be tackled outside the budget, for instance, the land acquisition is one, and then I think there are other issues which plague the private investment, and one of the main ones is the indecision on part of the policymakers as far as environmental issues are concerned, or for that matter, general procedure for clearance of project is concerned. I think there has been a delay in these. They have formed a cabinet committee, and I think they intend to push forward the private investment through by fast tracking some of the projects through that. But I think the issues that will finally help in sorting out the or kickstarting the private investments are more clarity on land acquisition and getting smoothing out the procedural issues, I think, as far as clearances of projects are concerned. I think once this happens, we will see some improvement in private investment, and also I think the central bank will, I presume, will cut interest rates, we believe, by 50 basis points. That should also help a little bit. I think from the budget perspective, they have done two things. One is, I think, by controlling the fiscal deficit, they have created a scenario where the RBI will be cutting interest rates, or their proclivity to cut interest rates will be much higher. So that is one positive. Second is, I think, the signaling impact of lower fiscal deficit is also, I think, to in general domestic investors as well as foreign investors. It sends out positive signals. But I think beyond that, I think you need to do a lot of things outside the budget to get the private corporate investments back on track.
So you mentioned 50 basis points of a rate cut. Is that across the entire calendar year, or are we only talking about the next couple of months? 50 basis points over what time frame?
Well, I think we believe 50 to 75 is our call for rest of the 2013, which means starting from March policy. We'll see about 50 to 75 basis point cut, repo rate cut through this year.
All right, Dr. Joshi, we'll leave it on that note. Thanks so much for joining in. That's a Crisil point of view on the macros, on the numbers that the budget finally presented. Up next, a conversation on taxation. What was in it in the fine print in Budget 2013? Puneet Shah of KPMG would be joining in on some of the